All right, for more, let's bring in Sidney Powell. She's a former federal prosecutor. Thanks for being with us, Sidney. And Sidney, one of the issues that this whole thing is raising is that of press freedom and of journalists protecting sources. Now, legally, journalists do not have any protective privileges, do they?
Technically, no, and they certainly don't have the privilege of committing crimes with any sort of impunity. So we need to know a lot more about this case in particular before we'll know to what extent the charges go and how she might be involved.
But this is raising, the bigger question here. Is it okay for the government to seize phones and emails of journalists? How does this come into the press freedom debate?
Well, it's always very troubling when the government goes after a lawyer like Michael Cohen and raids his office or gets all the materials from a journalist, because we think of both of those instances as enjoying a lot of protection. So I'm hoping at the very least that the Department of Justice set for itself a very high standard before getting any information from her. And as I understand it, they are just now looking at her information for evidence of what may have been his crimes, as opposed to threatening her with any charges.
Sidney, this is the first known instance of the Trump administration obtaining records of journalists, but the Obama administration also drew a lot of criticism for going after reporter records. Obama set the trend, the administration repeatedly using the Espionage Act, not to prosecute spies, but to go after government officials who talked to journalists. Tell us about that act. How does that allow for monitoring journalists and seizing their notes and such?
Well, that was very troubling. The Obama administration actually indicted more whistleblowers under the Espionage Act than all prior administrations put together. So that was especially concerning. This reporter with the New York Times now has not been indicted or charged in any way. They simply executed a search warrant, apparently electronically, and obtained all of her call records and digital information. I don't think they even got the contents of it, or if they did, they have not gone so far as to reveal any of that. But yes, I mean, if it's evidence of criminal activity, they're entitled to get it, even if it's from a reporter. It's just that everybody worries, and rightly so, about the chilling effect it has for reporters and their sources in general when that happens. And it's a serious concern. We simply need to know a lot more about how this is going to play out before we can render a real opinion on it.
Yeah, concerns on both ends of that argument. Sidney,
exactly.
What are the legal consequences here for James Wolfe? What does he face now?
He's looking at 3 counts of false statements to FBI agents, both in writing and orally. They gave him a full explanation of his rights, and this was in a voluntary interview that he apparently flat out lied to them about his contacts with 4 different reporters, especially the reporter who is now with the New York Times, to whom he had leaked all kinds of confidential information. So that is the most troubling aspect of his indictment. He's looking at 3 counts of false statements under 18 U.S.C. Section 1001, and each of which carries a penalty of 5 years, up to 5 years in prison.
So he's not charged with leaking or with anything linked to the leaking action, it sounds like, so far?
No, they have not charged him with that so far. I don't know the details of the classifications of the information that he may have leaked, and it might be that there are other charges that could be brought against him. But one of the things I appreciated about this indictment was how simple and straightforward it is. I mean, anybody can read it and understand exactly what he's being accused of doing, and there are real crimes there, not just a false statement to make up for a case where there isn't an underlying crime.
Right. Sidney, Wolfe had extensive contact with reporters about what was referred to as mail number 1. That was reportedly a reference to Carter Page. How does this fit into the Mueller probe picture, if at all, do you think?
I think it's going to spill over and implicate that in some ways. This is just the first of the leak indictments that I would expect to be coming, because there were any number of leaks. We know, of course, of McCabe's leaks, and the same U.S. attorney that has just brought this indictment against Mr. Wolf has the referral with respect to McCabe and his lying to FBI agents and his leaking to the Wall Street Journal. So it's just going to get more and more interesting, and the two are going to become more interrelated, I think, as things go on.
Well, meanwhile, Mueller bringing new obstruction charges against Paul Manafort. Note that they are charges that do not relate to Manafort's work on the Trump campaign or are involving allegations of alleged Russian election interference. What do you make of this development?
It's an additional effort to put more pressure on Mr. Manafort. They're clearly trying to break him. This is one of Andrew Weissman's typical tactics that I describe in my book, License to Lie, Exposing Corruption in the Department of Justice. They pile on so many charges, it ratchets up the defense costs enormously. The defendant feels very isolated because now he's no doubt afraid to talk to anybody who might help in his defense. One of the things they did in the Enron case was to name over 100 people as unindicted co-conspirators, which made everybody lawyer up. And they couldn't, none of the defendants could even speak to anybody to mount a defense for themselves because they were all under threat of indictment. So whoever Mr. Manafort's colleagues are in any of these endeavors that might have exculpatory evidence of his innocence are going to be afraid to talk to anybody for fear of being indicted for obstruction of justice themselves.
Yeah, that's a valid point you raised there. Sidney, thank you so much. Sidney Powell, former federal prosecutor. Appreciate your analysis.
Thank you, Michelle.